And then,
Are we doing just out of phase stuff?
yeah, we're going to be going over some out of phase on MC75 with, this is with porgs, right? The hell porgs?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Let me pull up, let me also share my screen. Okay. So going into, I mean, just going right into it, what do you guys know about, the MC75? Like, what's your plan going into, if you want to set up an out of phase?
I don't know very much at all. I know that I suck at it. I think I finally figured out what tethering was very recently.
Okay.
I think that's when you get the defender to kind of like bounce around on top of the MC, and I guess the idea is that you're just trying to draw the MC's fire so that everybody else can attack and take a little less heat.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly what tethering is. And tethering, technically, it can be done at any side of any, flagship, capital ship. Mostly the flagships is what this is used for. That's why you'll see some, I don't know what we call them anymore, Group A, Elite Division, whatever they're called these days. Basically, those top level, those higher level teams, you'll see them out of phasing the ISD from below, or you'll see people out of phasing the MC from above. Typically when it comes to tethering, let's just stick to the MC75 now, since that's why you guys are here. The top side of the MC75 is generally the easiest to set this up. And it can be a little tricky, at least to learn it at first. But once you get it down, it's going to be super easy. And there's really just a couple key elements that you guys have to be aware of in order to tether effectively. So the reason I asked that is because depending on how much you guys knew, I didn't want to waste time explaining that. If you guys, already knew what kind of aspects, or you guys already have like a definitive plan to set up the out of phase. So when you guys are going into the MC75, the flagship, I would imagine you have a very similar tactic as to what most other teams are doing, correct? Which would be, going for those gens, either a disable destroy, either double disable, or, double destroy, whatever configuration that you do. After the shields go down, what is your plan after that? What do you guys generally like to do?
Well, as flex, I have just, when the shields are down, I have to put an ion on the power system and then start looking for the breaches.
Okay, yeah.
The weak spots. And probably Bombard should do damage and prepare the out of phase, like destroying targeting and destroying the there is a 2 row of parallel turrets, something like that, probably. I don't know, I'm not sure because I'm not a bomber. But
okay.
Probably something like that, I'm not sure.
Right.
I'm just looking for the weak points.
Right, yeah, so generally the order of operations is to get the shields down however you see fit. Either it's double disable, disable destroy, destroy destroy. And then it's typically the next action that will happen is that the power is to be destroyed. In the meantime, generally bombers are just doing hull damage, or flexes are doing hull damage while they're waiting for their ion missiles to come up, or the support can take care of it if they're in with ion lasers. So then after the gens and the power goes down, that's when you get your crit points. That's when you guys are going after the crit points, doing as much damage as you can. Once you get all the crit points, you just lay into the hull and get the victory, essentially. So when you're in a circumstance where you think you're going to need to set up an out of phase, it's important to establish that depending on how you go about setting up your out of phase. There's pretty much 2 ways to go about it. So in all of these scenarios, let's say you have already taken care of the shield gens in one of those 3 ways, and you have already taken down power. One option that you guys can do, and this is everyone, this is both Flex, this is Bomber, even support, excuse me, is you can have the whole team basically only focus on the bottom portion of the MC75. If you see crit points on the top, you can leave them. You can just do as much damage to the bottom of the hull as you can while picking up any crit spots on the hull. And you can do that together. And then once it flips to, you know, what would be your defense phase, but you guys are going to stick in for the out of phase, that's when you can go above the MC75, and then you can start your tether process so that the rest of your team can do damage more effectively. That's one way to do it. The other way to do it basically is after the shields, after the power goes down, your bombers can be responsible for stripping turrets at the top of the MC75, which can be a little bit tricky, but I do know that Grey Squadron has they have a large document where it shows you all of the turret points, I believe, on the top of the MC75. And the tricky part is, for the bombers at least, you have to be as precise as you can, because you don't want to do too much damage to the hull. If you do too much damage to the hull, obviously you're going to lose those hull sections, and when you shoot them, you know, they're not going to be doing a lot of damage. So that's kind of like the trade-off, possibly, that is a little bit more risk-reward, because if you are able to strip most or all of the turrets on top, you really don't need a tether, because as long as your whole team is above the MC75, you're not going to get targeted by any of the turrets that are below or on the sides of the MC75. But it's not very generous. You guys have to be pretty much like directly above it. So that's another way that you can go about it. Personally, if you're just starting out with the, you know, if you really don't have a plan going into, you know, setting up an out of phase, that's okay. I personally would recommend the first method that I explained, was basically just after you get shield gens and power down, just do as much damage as you can to the bottom hull, the bottom portion of the hull of the MC75 with the crit points, and, you know, just laying in with the rotary and your ordnance. And then once it flips to defense, then you can go up top, you can set up your tether. But as you get used to it, it would be a good idea to delve into both and to understand both, because there may be a scenario where you're trying to set up getting rid of the turrets on the top and you run out of time. It flips before you can eliminate all the turrets on the top. So it's like, okay, we need a tether for at least, you know, a few more seconds while we take out those, you know, those last remaining turrets, and then the tether can basically let go, and can also point their guns at the MC75. So either way you go about it, you're going to have to know how to tether, which is what we're going to go over right now. Do we have, is anyone, any Flex on the team, a TIE fighter pilot?
I am not.
Okay. So due to the silence, I will be guessing that most of you are primarily running the Defender, correct?
That's correct.
I used to be a TIE fighter, but it's a lot of time that I don't do it. I can try.
Okay. No, it's fine. Like, you can do it either way. It's just that in this instance, generally 9 times out of 10, the TIE fighter is going to give your team a little bit more value on the out of phase. That doesn't mean the Defender can't do it too. The Defender can do it. It's just that at least if you don't have the turret strip, you're going to have to maintain a little bit more distance away from the MC75 on your tether. And we'll get to why that's important in a second. But first, let's just get to the tethering. So I'll just create a little match here. When you're practicing these things with your team, I just have a preset, you know, match settings, basically. You know, put the Raider all the way down, like, you know, 0.1 health. Same with the capital ships, but leave, you know, the flagship as is. So that way you can just kind of run through these. Or actually, you really don't even need to do anything. You can just do out of phasing right from the start. But if you guys were to practice, you know, setting it up, I would highly recommend having this kind of preset where you can just quickly move through the open, the frigate phase, and then you can suicide. Everyone can just suicide until you flip the phase. That's why I have the respawn timer of 5 seconds. So that way, after you guys set up gens and power, you know, you can start practicing your out of phasing, or you can do your gens power, turret stripping, then suicide, and then practice the out of phasing. But to set up the tether, we don't have to do anything there. Let me see. Make this invite only just so no one jumps in. And then I will do this with Defender first, I guess. And the biggest thing is when you are setting up your tether, you have to make sure that all of your teammates are, one, all above the MC75, and number two, make sure that they are outside basically 1,500 meters.
More than 500 or less? More.
As long as you get away, the further you are away your team is, the easier it's going to be to set up your tether, because you want the person who is tethering to be the first one in, because that's the one that the turrets on the MC75 are going to target. So I'm just going to make my way over here. And kind of a good, I didn't know there was a box. That's interesting. A good indicator to kind of look for is targeting, because it's that big old fin at the top. And that's kind of what, so you kind of want to approach this way. And you want to make sure you're already traveling sideways. And then if you look at my targeting computer, I'm still around 1,000 units away. Now I'm at 900. So for the defender, you want to chill around above 700. If you're chilling above 700, you're not going to take a lot of heat. You're moving fast enough. See, I'm dropping below 600, so I'm getting much more heat from the ion cannons. The ion cannons are going to hit you first, which is why defender needs to be further away, because they're going to be traveling faster. They're going to be the first ones to hit you. This is why TIE Fighter gives you much more value, and I can actually get a little closer to the MC when I'm tethering. Because the TIE Fighter does not care about the ion lasers, basically. Whereas the Defender, your shields are basically your entire health bar. Excuse me. So I'm kind of hanging out, actually, you know, maybe around the high 600s, around the 700s. And you want to be hanging out as close as you can without taking too much heat. If you find that you get a little bit too low and you're taking too much heat, you know, keep an eye on those shields, keep an eye on your boost. Just gain a little bit more altitude away from the MC75. Okay, so you can get those shields back up. This is basically what you're going to be doing. You're just boost gasping, you know, around the top of the MC75 to make sure that those turrets are targeting you and not your teammates. Now, the next question in my mind would be, okay, if this is all distance-based, like, why is it distance-based? It's like I'm not receiving, you know, you're moving a lot of fast, the lasers are only moving so fast, so that makes sense, but why does TIE Fighter, other than the ions, matter if, you know, I can get a little bit closer to the MC? And the answer to that, here, I'm just going to go die here. The answer to that is that depending on how far you are away from the MC75, say you're in the Defender, you're 700 units away, that basically is going to determine how close your teammates can get to the MC75 before it targets them. So if I am a Defender and I'm tethering at around 700 units, you have to relay that to your team so that they know I have to stay above 700 units of the MC75 or I'm going to start getting shot. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah.
That makes sense.
Okay, so now this is where the TIE Fighter has a bit more value in that is that I can get a little bit closer, just a little bit, so that maybe the bombers can make those passes just a tiny bit longer. Maybe they can get those torps a tiny bit closer, because maybe they might be launching torps, they might be launching golos or whatever. You know, they need maybe a little bit more extra time to get that lock. So that's basically it. So the defender, it can kind of boost drift in circles at around, I wouldn't go any lower than 600. But for the TIE fighter, you can get closer to maybe 300. I'm taking those ions, but it's not really doing anything. Start to get targeted by the missile launcher, which is fine. But, you know, I can hang out much closer to the MC without taking damage. Without taking real damage, I guess. Like, yeah, you might get ioned, and if, you know, your support is up there, they can kind of notify you of where you're at ionized wise. That's bad English, but... And if that happens, I mean, they can always throw you a resupply, and then it will repair the ion damage that you are taking, so you don't get ionized. So if you happen to have, you know, strictly a TIE fighter loadout that is just for out of phasing, you'll want the repair and then probably the boost extension kit if you just strictly want out of phasing. But I'm showing you this is because you don't need those to have as much energy as you need to be as close as I need to the MC to actually do an effective tether. And I'm still staying around like 300 here. So a missile's coming at me. This is actually good timing. This is where you actually do want to change your altitude a bit, because if you're constantly going in the same circle at the same altitude, eventually it's going to hit you. Same if you have enemy defenders. Say if you have X-Wings, say if you have Y-Wings that are trying to hit you with an ion missile or, you know, shoot you. It's a good idea to move around, change your altitude quite often, but, you know, just keep an eye on how far you are so that you can be still as close as possible so that your team can still get that damage in. But I'm also changing a little bit so that missile has a harder time hitting me. And it's not just, I'm not just going to run right into it. My path is changing a little bit more. And basically, once you get this rhythm down, you can do this as long as you want. If you find that you're taking too much heat, just gain a little bit more altitude. Reset yourself. You know, if you find you need a bit more energy, you need to take a little longer drifts, then you can gain a little bit more altitude to get that energy back. It's like, all right, now I got that energy back, I can dive a little bit deeper to give my team a little bit more time to get in there. And my voice is cracking all day today. So that's basically tethering in a nutshell. So it's all big on your distance from the MC-75 depending on your ship, your energy management, and basically your position. Position being, I can't go way out here to what would be, you know, our left side, the NR's right side of the MC-75, because then the side turrets are going to start targeting me. Those, you know, kind of rib things that are on the side, those are the turbo lasers. And once you get out too far to one side, those turbo lasers are going to start targeting you. And, you know, some turrets more on the other side of the MC-75, they might not lock onto you anymore. They might go after one of your friends. But yeah, I mean, that's basically it. How you can do that indefinitely, and your team will have basically free shots on, you know, the MC-75. So it's really just setting up that scenario. So going back to the value of either way you set it up, whether you want to just burn the bottom and then once you out of phase, you can have a dedicated tether pilot, or, you know, you can strip the turrets and then you don't really even need a tether as long as everyone stays right above the MC-75, you know, and then that's an extra gun that you have, whether it's your defender, whether it's your TIE fighter. But either way, you know, it's a very effective method to be able to stay in and get that extra damage before, you know, in order to win the game. So are there any questions, going into that? We can practice that a little bit here if you guys like. But I just wanted to explain and demonstrate basically the process and the things that you're going to be looking for in order to set up the correct out of phase, or at least to set up a good tether, because there are a little bit of tricks to it. As I said before, how you set it up, how you deal with the shield gens, how you deal with the power, whether or not you want to leave the turrets, and then secondly, how are you going to set up the tether? Because if you're just diving straight into the MC, those lasers, those turbo lasers, all that, they're going to target you and they're going to, melt you pretty quickly before you can get in position to start boost gasping in circles. And it's in the video, but basically my way of doing it, whether it's here in the Defender or the TIE Fighter, is basically just to spiral down slowly, take your time, so that you can effectively get in position without taking a lot of damage. Yeah, but I mean, like, that's basically all I have to talk about. So if you guys have any questions, or if you guys want to practice it, we can go over that now.
Any general advice for bombers, not necessarily tethering, but just surviving?
So general advice for bombers surviving. One is to trust your tether and trust your support. If you have both of them in, you might have your support switch over to bomber or switch over to another ship that shoots ordnance. But general advice for bombers, I would say what you can do, depending on the ordnance that you guys run, what do you guys run for your auxiliaries? Is it just full farm for both your bombers?
Yeah, full farm.
Okay, perfect. That's actually, I think, personally easier, because you don't have to set up torp runs. You don't have to straight line right at the MC75, which is ideal. So what I would be doing, let me get in here. This isn't going to be, I'll just demonstrate it to, what is it? I'll demonstrate it with a, like I forget, but basically you're going to be doing strafes. You're going to be doing long dead drifts across the top of the MC75. So that way you can kind of maintain an altitude without having to worry about drifting at the MC75. So you'll still be able to get your rotary on because the range is like 1,000. And same with, I believe, the multi-lock and the Goliath. So that's why the Defender needs to be, you need to make sure that you're as close as possible, as I explained earlier, so that, you can have that extra bit of wiggle room in case your bombers do get a little close. Defender should be sitting anywhere around 700. TIE Fighter will be hanging around 300 to 400. So obviously that's a much bigger difference, so you'll have a lot more area to work with. But let's just go through that real quickly.
Your fingers on the trigger and your eyes on the enemy.
I'll do my best not to get sniped here, because I'll just do a quick burn through the MC, or to the MC. Oh, Yavin's one of those maps where it doesn't kill automatically.
Blasted rebels.
Don't judge me on my bomber skills.
Here I come.
So I probably can just take Raider here. Yeah, that thing's gonna pop. Maybe even before I get there. Yep, okay.
Corvette has been destroyed. We've reached their frigates. Destroy those defensive ships.
Okay, great. So let's say you've taken down the shield gens, you've taken down power, and you're doing your... You're setting up your runs here for the out of phase. You have your tether already set up. So right now, as you can see, I'm kind of hovering around 1,000, which is fine. You just want to set up maybe long drifts. Don't get too greedy with it. Make sure you're going basically from the back to the front. I'm very close right now, but... because this is not something that I've practiced, but this is what I would recommend doing. And then if you need a little bit more, maybe if you have that TIE fighter, if you know you really need that little extra damage, you can just dive. Just dive for it. But I would keep an eye on that distance in your targeting computer. And then just kind of drift back and forth. You can still, you're still in distance to, you know, get off your multi-locks. You're still in distance to get off your Goliaths and at least decent rotary runs. And granted, I'm taking a lot of damage because I'm the, you know, the only one here, basically right now. So the MC has no one else to shoot at other than, well, the Raider's already dead, so just me. But you get the idea. So that's personally what I would do. Detenshi, if Detenshi's still in here, you know, you can add whatever, but that's basically what I do is, especially if you're running Slam Engine, you're going to have really long drifts to kind of, you know, do this. And then the reason I'm going back to front is because, again, the same reason with the tether. If you get too far out to this side, these turrets right here are going to start shooting you, okay? And you're going to start getting fire from the fin, maybe, as well. So you have to make sure that you are above the MC-75, just going back and forth here. And just doing these long strafes with your rotary, ideally.
There is no possibility to have bonks crash your teammates for people concentrated in that area.
So we have yet to have a bonk yet, I believe. Doing those side strafes, you might want to be a little aware of, you know, where your buddy is, your bomber buddy. But that's also why it's not only the responsibility of the tetherer, which would typically be one flex, to you know, announce where he's hanging out, whether it's at, you know, 600 units, 700 units. So that way you know kind of where you can play around, or maybe one of you kind of takes maybe like the slight left side or the slight right side. But that's one way to set up. If you're not comfortable with that, you could just do your standard, you know, going at it slowly and then firing off your ordnance, doing a rotary run, and then, you know, gaining altitude again, and then doing the same run, just like, you know, straight at the MC-75, bugging out, straight at the MC-75, bugging out again, you know, if you're more comfortable with that. Either way you do that, you just have to make sure that you're talking to your team so that everyone knows that you're where you're at. Say, you know, Detenshi and I are the ones that are in the bombers and we're doing, you know, our strafes or our runs. You know, Detenshi might tell me that, you know, he's hanging out around, you know, 800 units on the front side of the MC towards the nose. It's like, okay, so then if I know that he's going to be around there, then I'll stick to the back, or I'll stick to, you know, the right side or something. You know, so just saying where you're gonna try and hang out, where you're gonna try and make your runs from, that's really the biggest thing. And you shouldn't have too many problems.
Maybe just one more question.
Sure.
It's with the defender, it's mandatory to know how to shield skip, or you can do it also without shield skipping.
So if you don't have shield skipping, it's not the end of the world, because we're limited to nimble. Let's see how bad it is. I don't think it is, because I'm pretty sure I did this.
Because I play with a controller and it's not easy to, at least for me.
Yeah, that's fine. So you have, so you're just on controller with, are you doing basic power management?
No, I'm using advanced power management, but you know the keyboards. It's not like the QWERTY keyboard
Mm-hmm.
keys. It's different because sometimes you press one button, but it's like it's in the middle of two buttons, and it takes both the output, the output, so it's a bit a mess.
Okay.
Controller is good for PK, but not that much for.
Sure. So, so your question was, is boost or is shield skipping mandatory?
Yeah.
Okay, so to simulate that, I'm gonna go to basic power management so that I can't shield skip. I don't think it'll be too much of an issue. That's just my guess because it's a nimble shield and it's gonna charge quickly regardless. But let's find out. If it ends up being a problem, there are remedies to that. You might just have to switch, you know, your defender, depending on, you know, your auxiliaries, or you may have to increase your distance a little bit if you're taking too much heat, or depending on, you know, how close you can get. Because, yeah, you can just, you know, if you find that you're taking too much heat and you can't charge your shields as fast, then, you know, just get some distance, you know, get some altitude, get a little bit further away so that you have time to, you know, get your shields back up and then, you know, dive back in. So I'm at 600, 500. I want to take some shots here. And the advantage of keeping your distance is that the defender is going to be much faster. So we're definitely losing some shields here. So let's gain some altitude. Okay, so around 700, you know, you're fine, basically. As long as you're hitting those long drifts, it's like, okay, I need to wait for that cooldown. I'm getting a little close now, so I'll get some more altitude. Let's get around 800, 900.
Okay, so you always do engine, shields, weapon, engine, shields, weapon.
So you don't have to do all three. That's just kind of my cadence, just so that I'm always going to have boost energy. But you can just go between shields and engines if you want. You know, I'm still sitting around 700. I'm still getting, you know, overcharged shields. Still hanging out above. So yeah, I mean, I don't think it's going to be an issue. It's just anytime you start taking a little bit too much heat, you just got to make sure that, you know, you gain that altitude, get around the 800s. It looks like is really safe. And then yeah, just make sure you always have boost, really. But yeah, shield skipping not a problem. If it is a problem, you could just do the whatever it is. Is it APS? Advanced Power System or whatever.
Yeah.
So I mean that's an option if you need to do it, but
Definitely.
yeah, but you don't need to. You'd be fine with not shield skipping. You don't even need multi-drifting, because I was not multi-drifting during any of that. I promise you that. Any other questions? Okay. If not, I'll stop the recording here.